if you could just for a few minutes, Eddie, just tell us a little bit about yourself. How you got on the TikTok, and we'll get started, man.
Yes, sir. I am a licensed professional counselor in the states of Alabama and Hawaii. I won't be in for Hawaii for much longer, but as of now, I am. And I got on TikTok during the pandemic. I just got on here BSing, and I threw out a video that went viral called Parental Stockholm Syndrome, about how most of us grew up in a state of essentially having been kidnapped by our parents and loving our captors being the best route of survival. Because love and what we got from love, even if it wasn't the greatest, was better than what we would get from resistance. And so we grew up and became people who should now ask our parents for accountability and tell them that what you gave wasn't enough. And so the essence of my platform has been about identifying those problems that we've had as parents, as kids, and breaking out of them and creating boundaries and figuring out how they've impacted us moving forward. So this conversation fits the bulk of my content and how I got started initially. But I've just been on that journey ever since. And at some point in that journey, I got on the conversation of patriarchy, because all of these things overlap. Patriarchy, white supremacy, capitalism, democracy, Christianity, they all came over here on the same boats in some capacity. So it's hard to really untangle all of them things. So I got on patriarchy coming from the essence of the father-son relationship, the mother-son relationship, and those dynamics. So for the journey, I've been lately talking about more about patriarchy than family, but that's pretty much been the journey at this point.
Nah, I appreciate you, brother, and I always appreciate whenever I see you on live or if I get to share space with you, because you always bring the facts, man. And that the metaphor you have of the cool cup of patriarchy,
Oh yeah.
man, that
it's
I quote that often because it's so
yeah.
apt.
It's sitting in front of both of us right now. We got to
Yeah,
figure out how to have this
yes, sir.
conversation without sipping it, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So, wanted to talk today with you about kind of formative years, right? How things get started, and specifically like with attachment styles and things of that nature. Can you talk a little bit about anxious, avoidant, and secure attachment styles, and how you've seen them really show up in children and later in adults, in adult relationships?
Yeah. So the first thing I want to say is it's attachment style theory.
Yes, sir.
uh, so early in the days of psychology, a bunch of people were trying to figure out how to understand humanity from a broken template. Matter of fact, the attachment style data came from an unethical foundation. They essentially said, hey, we're going to see how parents not being in the room impact kids. And so they put these kids in these rooms with a parent, made the parent leave to see how they react, brought the parent back, brought a stranger in the room, left the kid in with the stranger, and then had the parent leave.
Mm.
And then the parent came back. And in some instances, the parent could console them. In some instances, the parent couldn't console them. It's an unethical foundation, but from it came the attachment style theory, right?
Yes, sir.
So attachment style theory and all of these different styles, secure, anxious, avoidant, disorganized, they all came from trying to answer a question. What in our childhood impacts how we exist as adults? The next best thing to understand about it is one component in a sea of all of the pieces that create us.
Okay.
So even if you say I'm anxious avoidant, it means so much and it means so little at the same time.
Yes, sir.
And from the field of psychology and counseling, saying, hey, you're anxious, avoidant, dismissive, or anxious, avoidant, what it's meaning to do is give us a base of treatment, not solidify a person into this existence of diagnosis, right?
Right.
Because what we also know about attachment styles is that they can change. But going back to the core, secure attachment means, so the essence of attachment styles is safety. What in our childhood created our ideals of how we find safety. So in secure attachment, that's when your mama, every time you cried, she came to tend to you. Every time you wanted the bottle, she brought it to you. This created in your mind that, my caretakers are safe. The people who love for me are safe. And so it's okay to open up to them. It's okay to wait for them. It's okay to build expectations with them. They're going to try to meet those needs. That's secure.
Right.
Then when we go to avoidant, that is where anytime the child cried, he just cried and cried and cried and cried. Nobody came. Or the child that learned to walk on their own, where it's like, when did he learn to walk? The child who never had people there when he needed them. When he needed that bottle, he didn't get it. What that formulated in that child's mind is people are not trustworthy. People are going to leave you by yourself, and you got to figure it out on your own. And so then we go to avoidant. That was avoidant. This is anxious. Anxious is you have a random mix of sometimes I'm there, sometimes I'm not. Now, what that does for a person is it says, I trust you, but kinda. And it's like, I want you to be there, but maybe not. It creates this dynamic. And so, and disorganized is like when somebody has harmed you greatly. And that when it becomes like very unpredictable. So all of these things represent how it looks as you grow up in the attachment style theory. Because the secure person, when they grow up, they are comfortable in relationships. They feel good about being with people. They can be vulnerable and open. Right. Anxious are people who they deeply want a loving connection. And so they try hard to get it. But underneath that is always this idea that they're not enough. And so they're always trying to get validation from that person, which sometimes that can be nice, but sometimes it can be nasty. And then when you go to avoidant, that's a person who engages in relationships and desires to engage in relationships, but for the most part, they're emotionally distant, emotionally closed off. They don't connect. They have a difficult time expressing that intimacy. And all of this is rooted in those relationships that we have when we are growing up.
No, I appreciate that clarity, and I think you hit it spot on. Is whenever we're talking about any topic, it's one lens to look at someone. It's not their entire personality, right? And I think sometimes especially when you're learning something new, it's like, okay, this is all that I am almost, and it's like, no, this is just one part of it, it's one aspect of it. But take it for what it's worth and try to learn from it. For me, how this topic came was when I learned that I had more of an avoidant, anxious attachment style. I was both. I wanted attention, I wanted validation, but at the same time, I kept people at a distance because of that trust, especially in intimate relationships. And so I realized that, and I'm like, oh man, this is part of why I might be driving my partner crazy, because in one moment I'm like, yeah, come here. I want to, want them close to me. At another point, I'm like, no, but I don't trust you. And I was wondering, like, how did my social conditioning help to really shape my attachment style? Was it just from my relationship with my mother? Was it just from my relationship with my father? Or was it society at whole that helped to shape it? So I wanted to ask you on the topic of patriarchy, first of all, what is patriarchy in your own words? Like, how would you define that?
At the end of the day, patriarchy is a system in which men hold systemic power to make most of the decisions. And because of that power, it's infiltrated all parts of society where people who are not men struggle with that. And it goes back to that example of all of these different systems came over here on the same boat, because the system of white supremacy does the same thing for black people.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And the system of heteronormativity does it for LGBT community. So all of the oppression runs in the same template. So patriarchy is just the man version of that template, where men are at the top.
Absolutely. So do you think that patriarchy impacts the way kind of boys and girls learn how to relate to themselves and each other?
Absolutely.
And if so, like how?
Absolutely. Lately, how I've been talking about it is we're all born with a box of patriarchy, men and women, boys and girls. And boys get a big ass box that they go through of, oh, what's in here? Oh, no, don't be weak. Okay. Oh, I got to be real strong. Okay. I can't show my emotions. I can't be vulnerable. And women get a little bitty box but that box is mostly not how they should exist, but how they should exist on the outskirts of men and what they should accept from and through men. That's kind of their system. And so the way that patriarchy harnesses in women is that they accept those things about men and come to expect those things about men, right? So it's very hard to disassociate patriarchy with those systems, because the same system that says that men have to be strong and can't be weak, they start utilizing those words for boys really, really early. And because of that, how boys engage with girls makes a difference. Think about how boys get into that, like hitting girls, and everybody around them says, oh, to the girl, oh, that just means he likes you.
Right.
You know, because we haven't given the boy the words to say, I like you. You know, because that is emotional vulnerability. That is opening yourself up to being rejected. That is opening yourself up to people perceiving you as weak. All of these things play into the very beginning of our presence here as people.
No, absolutely. I remember it was basically like all happened in one summer. Like before this summer, everyone was like playing together. You know what I mean? Sometimes the girls would be doing double dutch and doing their own thing, but we'd be playing hide and seek, we play tag, we'd be out just being children, being kids, you know what I mean? And then, after this particular summer, it was like we separated into two different camps, you know what I mean? And what I noticed growing up is that I noticed like girls becoming more and more like vigilant, like they would almost like they were not necessarily afraid, but just really weary of myself as a male. Whereas a lot of us got distant. You know what I mean? Like just started not to care as much. And it when I was in it, it was about being cool. You know what I mean? It was all about, being cool in front of my friends and whatnot. And girls became, first they were like, they had cooties, you know what I mean? Oh, don't deal with girls. And then after that, it was like almost like a sport to get phone numbers and things of that nature. So it was that transition. But when I used to go back into schools, it was really apparent. Like if I went into like a second, third grade school, kids are, basically one group, they're having fun. And when I go into like a fifth, sixth grade group, it was almost like the boys almost was like had like a deadness, inside. And I know part of that is patriarchal condition, and part of that might be just dealing with like impoverished conditions. Like at what point do boys and girls kind of transition into that as far as gender roles are concerned?
What I think I've been in a school as early as first grade, and I walked in and I was waiting for the line to go down, because I go to schools and I see kids. I used to before the pandemic more than I do now.
Yeah.
And it was four like first graders sitting at the table, and one of them said, "How many of y'all want to have sex?" And two of them raised their hand, and the other two was like, "What is that?" So really, I think it depends on how early children are introduced to concepts that are generally for older, because a lot of those kids have older siblings who are 15 and 16 talking about stuff, and they don't know what it is, but they absorb that and they take it out into the world. I think they naturally come to it probably at about 7 or 8. Because and boys are primed for it before they actually start seeing what it looks like. For example, parents don't have to teach boys about patriarchy and a man's role in society and masculinity. All they got to do is binge watch John Wick or the James Bond series.
Right.
They'll leave the James Bond series believing that boys that become men are supposed to be strong, be emotionally gathered, and women are their toys and they arm pieces. That's they would leave there believing that men are more valuable and women are less valuable.
Right.
So through society and through just absorbing TV, they gain that, especially from growing up in the 80s and the 90s, how TV was then. Men were the goofy ass, don't know nothing figures, and the mamas just ran the show. When you think about Carl Winslow, when you think about the dad from Boy Meets World, all the daddies was just goofy. You
Al
know,
Bundy.
yeah, Al Bundy. I mean, you can go over to I guess the progressive father would have been on Full House, Danny Tanner, where he was actually taking care of the kids himself. But like to pull that off, they had to have no women in the show.
Right.
It just had to be all men because when a woman enter the picture, she's through society's lens expected to run the show. And so um they learned that early through those parenting dynamics. So a big part of it depends on the parents, but I think 7 or 8 is when they start looking around and saying, you know what, I wield a little bit of power in this situation as boys. And that's about the age when girls be like, I don't think this is fair. you know. I think that's around that age.
Yeah, it's not to get off topic, but when you bring up like John Wick and things of that, like the contrast you just made, there's like almost like on the battlefield, you're all powerful, but when you're in a home setting, you're almost helpless. You know what I mean? Like you just just there passing the time. I'm here. I work. I come home, and then everything else just kind of kind of takes care of itself. Unless I got to fix something. And when I think about John Wick specifically, this was a man that was supposedly like dedicated to his wife, but then goes completely contrary to pretty much everything his wife probably would have wanted for him. You know what I mean? Because she got him a puppy. You know what I mean? Like wants to nurture his loving side, and because of another tragedy, he just goes completely off the deep end, and almost this fantasy of her. You know what I mean? Of getting revenge and justifying her, but so many friendships get exploited and break. Some of his friends even want up being unalived in the movie, all because of this virtue of, oh, I have to live for revenge, I have to live for this honor, but not really paying attention to what his wife actually would have wanted. How often do we get, I guess, what women really want? You know what I mean, as far as from us as partners to what kind of the patriarchal idea of what our role is as a man in a relationship. And does that cause any cognitive dissonance, or is it, you know what I mean, like how does that play out?
Um, I think it more than anything, it plays out to our detriment as men. It's women's detriment too. Don't get me wrong, but like uh, the journey that takes us down as far as our role as men, it puts us at a position where we are a function. And Chris Rock got the joke about how uh, men are the only people that ain't loved unconditionally.
Right.
But the way that joke is framed and the way that men who utilize that dialogue is framed makes it sound like it's the fault of the people who are not giving us the thing that we want. But in reality, we are the culprits of not having our own needs met because we've created the function for ourselves. They're following our marketing plan. When we in relationships as men, we market ourselves to our family. And if you market yourself as a man that don't need much, if you market yourself as a man that really just needs your family to be okay,
Right.
why would your family pick up anything different? Right? So a lot of the men that I'm working with currently, I'm working on helping them use their voice to remarket themselves to say, I do need things. I have been saying that I don't need things, but I do need things, and I need y'all on board with the things I need. And most of the time, that it don't take that much of that. Your family be there ready to give you things, but you denied it for the first 12 years, and then resentment built up. And now because of that resentment, you feel a certain way about your family because they're not giving you what you need, but you're not getting what you need because you haven't used your own voice for it. You know, the way that it comes out because of patriarchy, though, the way that manifests outwardly is that men are aggressive towards women and their families, which is how it ends up residually being the impact of them versus you. You know what I'm
Mm.
saying?
No, that hit me hard because that was definitely me. Like because I associated love with sacrifice, and not just sacrifice, but kind of a stoic, silent sacrifice. Like that was supposed to be what I did as a man. I didn't go into marriage or father saying I need something or I need something from my family. It was I was supposed to give, and then they were just supposed to respect the gift, right? And what I found was that often I was giving things that they didn't necessarily want or ask for. I mean, there was never that discussion. And because I hadn't been acclimated to expressing my needs, especially like growing up in childhood, because as a boy, it was just, go out and play, do what you do. It was never, and this is me coming from a single parent home. Even for my mother, it wasn't like, oh, what do you need? As once I got to a certain age, it was like, okay, you're doing you. You're a young man, and men are going to take care of themselves. And to a certain extent, we do, and because of that, we get conditioned to never really seeking. Okay, what do I really want in my heart? What do I really want in my emotional life? I mean, we weren't, at least and I'm speaking for myself, I wasn't socialized for marriage. I was socialized to go into business. We were socialized to go into war. I mean, whether you become in the army or a police officer, something like that, those are the toys we played with. I didn't play with baby dolls. I didn't play at family. You know what I mean? So when I got into an actual family, it was all new. As opposed to just what I maybe witnessed, which wasn't much, and what I saw on television, which was fabricated. So, but at some point, that veil is going to come down, and you're going to have to really come face to face with who you are and what you really want out of your life. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and not only who you are, but how much of who other people believe you to be is based off of how you communicated about that person that you no longer desire to be, or that you feel stuck in, and that you're pigeonholed into that place. A lot of men are pigeonholed into that space, and at some point they realize this space don't make sense. It don't feel good, but patriarchy tells them that I got to continue that process because this is just how men are supposed to be. And it's not how men are supposed to be. It's how we've been conditioned to believe we're supposed to be, but we don't got to be that.
It's a great point. Just a follow up, do you think that the enforcement of strict gender roles has any impact on the child's, like, I know we're looking at the lens of attachment style, but just in their development in general, like, does that, if it does, like, how does that impact boys and girls differently when we're talking about, okay, we talked about that box and girls getting a smaller box, like, how does that impact their development over time?
This is where we get really complicated and really dicey because this conversation, when we have this conversation big, we want it to be easy categories to put places in, but the data does not support that adhering to strict gender roles cause a problem. If we're talking about attachment styles, what causes a bigger problem is not having a secure attachment. So if you had parents that delivered you a secure attachment, but also adhered you to strict gender roles, that wouldn't be as big of a problem as not adhering to strict gender roles and being in and avoidant or anxious or any other outside an insecure attachment style.
Right.
So it gets really dicey when trying to like hone in on it.
No, go ahead.
I mean, you can ask some questions. I guess the last piece I'll say is the data. There's some strong data to support types of sexism based on your attachment style. And one of the ideas, and I'll talk about this article that I got a little bit later because it is a really, really good article to read for the sake of this conversation. And they do something with the John Wick connection. Matter, let me go into it real quick.
Please do.
So there is a link. So hostile sexism is sexism that just believes that men and women are at odds. This is a war, battle of the sexes. Benevolent sexism means that we see women as valuable. We see them as needing protection and provision. We see them as being this thing that is desired, but it's condescending. It's not really. We pick up the stuff for the ladies because they're not capable.
They're the weaker sex.
Yeah, not because they are actually better. It's because they need to be watched over. And then you got ambivalent sexism, which is a combination between hostile and benevolent, where it wavers. And that's where I would say John Wick is in that ambivalent misogyny, because he cares for his wife and values the romantic relationship they had enough to throw his weapons away, but not enough to engage with the sentiment of the puppy versus the puppy itself. Because the sentiment of the puppy is, I don't want you to fall into that life that you used to have. You know, the reality of that puppy was, to him, was, well, since the puppy gone, I don't have to honor her wishes. I'm going to be a man, and I'm going to honor, you know, what I believe a man should do to honor her wife, which drifts over to hostile misogyny.
No.
And there's a link with that. There's the link through attachment styles is avoiding attachment is likely to be hostile without the benevolence, and anxious are likely to be ambivalent, where they have that combination of hostile and benevolent wavering depending upon the circumstances.
Is that because they still value like feminine attention?
But it's because the way that anxious attachment developed was with the internal desire to have that person there. They just didn't have them there when they wanted them and when they needed them. So the core is, I want the person there, but I don't trust that they're going to be here forever. And so every little thing, they may start looking for reasons why a person might leave. And so they have to take on extreme metrics to make you stay because of that. You know, or they might be people pleasing because the way that I believe that I get you to stay is that I always do the things that you want me to do, you know, but also when it feels like you're about to leave, and that can be real or it can be imagined, I got to do some stuff to make you stay, which may be aggressive, which may be silent treatment, maybe all of those things come together and do that. So that's why they both exist. And also, but we can't minimize the patriarchy intersection. We can't minimize that patriarchy in that system says that men are still at the top of the hierarchy. So even though I love this woman, and even though I put her at the top of the pedestal, I'm only doing this because she has agreed to the social rules of being the kind of woman that is suitable for patriarchy. As soon as she gets out of being suitable for patriarchy, then she has impacted the power structure of my masculinity versus the loving nature of what I desire to have in a partner. It's like you got to exist in this very small space as a woman in order to get that kind of ambivalent sexist love in that way.
So is that go into this conversation about like black women and protection? Like why, in the cases when a black woman deserves protection, or women in general, should get protection from a man, and when she shouldn't get protection from a man?
Absolutely. I think it's more, I think it's a little bit more sneaky though than this conversation, because what I think is happening is I think a lot of hostile sexists and the manosphere, red pill and the Andrew Tates and the Fierce and Fear, all of those things, I think that they are hostile sexism. And I think they are giving a lot of men who don't feel the way that they do language to use that looks and sounds like hostile sexism. And it sounds like benevolent sexism and minimizing, you know, but at the end of the day, yes, the core of that whole message, that whole conversation, that providing and provision, a big part of it is, yes, you have to be this kind of woman to get my protection from me. But I also think that a lot of men who are saying that don't care about having women in their lives either.
So it's like I'm using benevolent sexism to camouflage my hostile sexism.
Exactly. And it's a lot of men who are benevolent sexism who, if they ran into a secure dude who is fighting against and challenging those things, would be willing to listen to a different version. But it's really, I mean, it feels good to have somebody validate the things that make us feel better about our own wrongs. Right. And so if you run, and I'm finding this with young boys, you know, there's a certain point at which a boy has an opportunity to either run into somebody who says some reasonable shit about women or some unreasonable shit about women. And they're going to believe whichever one they run into first. When they run into me, I can put them on a path that's decent. If they run into a red pill cat who is saying that, hey, you shouldn't date a single mother, they're going to have that. That's what they're going to follow. And so I think a lot of the men they're throwing this language into society that's making a lot of the young people feel like these things make sense. And they don't, because they're mass applying all of these different complex conversations to all women, where it's like, okay, if you put these 10 traits definitely exist in 10 different women, but y'all making it sound like all these traits exist in every woman.
Right.
That's not a functional or healthy way to perceive, people. And it's definitely not a healthy way for you to find your individual person, because you're not trying to date all women. You're trying to find one woman. And so that's it's definitely a part of that conversation.
That brings up a great point, because it's you. A lot of times men will ask, well, I don't know how to talk to women. And I'm trying to learn more about women, when it's really about learning about the woman that's with you. And we try to apply all these stereotypes and generalizations to one woman who may not feel that way at all. But we never take the time to get to know her, because we've been taught not to value woman's opinion, but to consider a woman's stereotype. I look at this conversation, what was called a gender war. And it's not a gender war. Like anytime war has been attached to anything really, it's been a manipulation. I look at the war on drugs, the war on poverty, the war on terrorism. It's always a manipulation and an optics game, as opposed to an actual war where there's equal players on the battlefield, so to speak. What's been labeled as the gender war is really women coming up and saying, well, wait a minute, the way we've been living hasn't been conducive to my happiness and to my my livelihood. And yeah, I'm going to grow out of that. And men, men and women coming back more traditional, saying, no, you need to get back in your place. You need to get back into this box that we have for you. And it's really sad to see where younger men who are coming up and don't have a lot of experience with women, as human beings, but just more so what they see on TV, what they consume in media, are now listening to the most vocal men who are also the most toxic men. So I think what you just said is really a clarion call for men that do have more moderate and sincere sensibilities towards women to speak up. Like if you're an older man, if you're in your 30s, you're in your 40s, and you've been able to establish healthy relationships, this is you're needed. Your voice is needed to speak up, so that men have a positive pathway to healthy relationships. Because at the end of the day, if you're going to base your relationships on a dominator model, at some point you're going to end up either making the people all around you miserable or being miserable yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I love you, man. Your insights are gold. I really appreciate your everything you shared so far. And for those that are listening, can you tell us a little bit about like your personal journey and how you got to where you are? What has been like your personal I guess journey through like your own attachment styles and your own journey through patriarchy to come to these type of conclusions?
I got you. I was gonna say to another point you made.
Yeah.
Men who say things like "I want to get to know women," they're normally asking it from a biased vantage point. Because if you haven't done work, the only way you can perceive it is from a vantage point of women being prey. And what you're trying to figure out is their walking pattern, and how they run and how they maneuver, and in order to really want to get to know a woman, you have to believe that women are worth getting to know. And in that journey, you have to accept their autonomy, you have to accept their humanity, and you have to see them as potently as you see yourself in the mirror. And so like you got to change those vantage points. So for me, my grandparents were teachers in the 50s and 60s when my aunts and uncles were children. And that's when integration was about to happen. The way that my city did integration, small town, was we're going to bring the black teachers over that we deem acceptable over to our white schools, and their kids will come, and that will be the first template of integration. And so my aunts and uncles then moved over there. So I very much grew up in an environment where I learned from people who had to move into white supremacy and integrate very fast. Mm-hmm. So all the pictures that I see of my aunts and uncles and stuff, all of their friends was white. The proms and stuff was white. Um, and so I grew up in an environment that said, "Hey, look, white people going white. Just let them do it. Don't worry about it. It ain't no big deal. You know, you can find your own piece of happiness over here." And so, because of that, I spent a lot of time not understanding the essence of blackness and not understanding the essence of any kind of oppression. You know, the one that I was facing at the time was white supremacy. It took me well into my 20s to kind of like when I got to college, I went to Auburn University, which was just too white. People wouldn't sit by me on the bus. You know, people say there's this question that's asked of whether black people that went to HBCUs are blacker than people that go to PWIs, and I understand that question to mean, do the black people at HBCUs have a more culture rich experience as it pertains to blackness? And I believe that to be the case, but I ain't never felt more like a nigga than when I was at Auburn. Just to let you know, I'm sorry for that, the language, but
It's all
I felt like the version of black that nobody is seeking to feel like. I felt no more like that at Auburn, and it taught me a lot about myself. But I'm going down this white supremacy journey because I spent a lot of time understanding what the template of being black and white supremacy looks like. Um, and so when I got introduced to the idea that there were other oppressions outside of my own, it was really easy to adopt the idea. But more than anything, I was willing to ask myself, if patriarchy is real, if misogyny is real, if sexism is real, have I done it? And I began investigating myself. And I began isolating moments where I had the stuff. I had patriarchy. I had heteronormativity. You know, I had all of these different systems, but because of all of the work that I had to do, you know, to aggressively rework the stuff my family gave me to understanding my own version of blackness, it helped me make these lateral moves. And patriarchy, I just got introduced to bell hooks. Just I don't even remember how, I don't remember when, but those were the readings that made me say this is definitely a thing. And not only that, but if when I just hear my daddy telling stories about him and women and understanding how my granddaddy then was, and like my mama then, I can't lie, like I had an ideal template of what women in somebody's life should look like.
right.
All the women. My mama, my grandmama, my aunt. The only aunt that's a problem, she ran away from home at 16 and came back at 50. So she didn't have no impact on me. But all the women that were in my life will stand up then and they stand up now. You know?
That's what's
And
up.
so I just never had a conceptualization of negative ideas about women. I just didn't have that. I had the little piece of what society showed when I watch movies, you know, and that didn't manifest until I got into my own relationships and I was trying to figure out, well, what am I supposed to be doing? Who am I supposed to be? How am I supposed to be? And that reverted me back to those things, you know, and so it's just been a really convoluted journey. But for me, it started off in aggressively pursuing understanding white supremacy to where I understood that oppression is a template. You can put different roles in different oppressions on different sides. So when you look at white supremacy versus patriarchy, first off, you got the dominating group, then you got the group that's oppressed under them. Then within the oppressed group, you got people who try to cozy up to the group next to them. So you might call that a pick me in patriarchy. You might call that a coon in white supremacy or a Sambo. You
Right.
know, under that, you got the groups that advocate for the freedom of those people. So in patriarchy, you might call that feminism and womanism and all of the other groups that come from there. And then white supremacy, you might call that civil rights movement groups and black activist groups. Patriarchy is, oppression is a template. And patriarchy, you can put all of those roles in one. White supremacy, you can put all of those roles in one. Heteronormativity, you can put all of those roles in one. Because oppression creates a type of dynamic that all of these different roles have to exist in order to maintain it and in order to fight against it and in order to keep it thriving. All of those roles have to exist. And the people who perpetrate the oppressions, they know that. And we on the underside of being able to do things about it. But that was my journey in essence. Long way of saying it.
That's powerful. And my salute to you. I It's frustrating when people who are familiar with the template of oppression don't see themselves in it. and don't see how they participate in it. Or maybe, as you said, maybe it's more so refusal. You know what I mean? Like they're conscious of it, but it's more so more, I want to take advantage because I want the benefits of this. You know what I mean? So men can be very familiar with how racism works, what its origins are, how it affects people, both the oppressor and the oppressed, but then be completely oblivious or seemingly completely oblivious when it comes to patriarchy and misogyny. And for the life of me, I don't see how, other than the cognitive dissonance that goes associated with any belief system. Like for me, I came out of like kind of a radical Christian background. So, I didn't grow up Christian, but that's in my kind of mid to late 20s. I got very involved in the church, and believe the Bible literally. You know what I mean? Down to Jesus was coming back in the next 20 years. So we got to, save as many souls as possible, get the gospel out, great commandment, all of those things. And at the same time I came to Christianity was the same time I got married. And the more I got into the Christian rhetoric and spreading the good news and trying to live out that life, the more I ignored just really who was supposed to be my first ministry. But because of the selective focus of myself, first of all, but also the way that entire culture works, where it's focused on being male led and male dominated, and not necessarily considering women in that same equal regard. At least not going to make a blanket statement about all Christianity. I'm just making a statement about the Christianity I came out of. And when I realized that, many years later, and I started looking at the Bible through new eyes and saying, wait a minute, the same Bible that a Ku Klux Klan member might use to justify racism because of the curse of Ham is the same Bible that a misogynist is using to justify sexism because of the curse of Eve, and or how they use to justify homophobia, or et cetera, or how they use to justify poverty. Poor is always going to be with you, and so it wasn't necessarily Christianity itself or any belief system, but how that belief system is used and adopted by empire. And all the things I was ignoring about through history. God must have a plan. God did that for a reason. Then I had to really take a look at that and say, wait a minute, the way this is being used is just evil. You know what I mean? And I had to, when I confronted that and started to deconstruct Christianity, then I started to really dismantle my own misogyny first, and then started to really look at how other men were affected by it as well.
Yeah.
So I always appreciate hearing personal testimonies. So I appreciate you sharing yours. And I know every time I share mine, I learn a little bit more about myself and about others when we get into that type of conversation.
Yeah.
Talking
And
about, oh, go ahead.
My mama had us in church 6 days a week. And it wasn't like church. It was when she did something church related, we went with her. So Monday prayer group, Tuesday was a free day, Wednesday Bible study, Thursday kids choir practice, Friday adult choir practice, Saturday we either went to the nursing home to sing with her in the church, or we went to visit our daddy in prison. Two of them equally problematic to me. And Sunday we went to a church service from 10 to 3, and then we went to go see a prophetess at an abandoned prison in Georgia, which was about an hour away. This was an ongoing situation for about eight years of my life, which contributed to my my work ethic, because I would anything to get out of going to church. I'm going to work. I'm going to work out of school. I'm going to work. I'm going to work if I can go to work. And but what I began trying to figure out is how much does patriarchy influence Christianity versus how much has Christianity influenced patriarchy? And I think my assessment is that, like, regardless of which one has influenced the other one, I think that they work in such conjunction now that even men who are fighting to be out of the system of patriarchy has to utilize it to uphold the systems of the Bible if they are more Christian than they are patriarchs, and so they still have to put on the mask of patriarchy, or a person who is deconstructing Christianity, they still have to put on the mask of patriarchy. Like, at this point, both of those systems are making a man put on a different mask. Patriarchy, so I can uphold my masculinity, and Christianity, so I can secure my place in this eternal afterlife.
Nah, very good point. It's like, which came first, the chicken or the egg?
Yeah.
And a lot, when you look at the verses of scripture that are emphasized in some churches, it's not Christianity that's even being practiced. It's patriarchy is the religion. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's focused on the maleness of God, focused on the maleness of Jesus, and even the maleness of the Holy Spirit, and more so, what let's uplift the men. Even though women may make up 70%, 80% of the church, we're going to focus on the men, and the women almost begin to worship the pastor in a way. You know what I mean? It's almost like the pastor knows this, pastor knows that. Not necessarily independent study, not growing leadership, not growing in your ability to critically think and rightly divide the word of truth yourself, but enforcing the dependency on a man to tell you what you need to do with your life. And
Yeah.
and your finances. Let's not forget about that. And it gets so wild to the extent where a man, because he holds the title of pastor, can just make some stuff up and it flies because it's the pastor who said. I was watching a video on TikTok the other day where a man was trying to equate the God Jesus being a tithe from God, and the tree of life, or the tree of the knowledge of good and evil being a tithe. And I'm like, where did he get this from? But it was just, let me just twist this a little bit. Let me shape this
Hmm.
to get the outcome that I want for myself and my congregation, not even necessarily the word of God. And that's
Yeah.
coming from a Christian perspective. So it's it's very curious how the language of pimps calling themselves bishops um, can get really eerie close to that. I wanted to circle back to trauma a little bit, because I know as you were talking about it and saying that it's really about safety, and I think about where is safety in certain communities. Like sometimes we don't see much of safety, right? We experience a lot of different traumas, sometimes from outside of the home, sometimes within the home, sometimes both. In many cases, both. So how does that trauma shape a child in their attachment style or in their development in general? And once you realize that your trauma is affecting the way you think and the way you behave, what are some methods that you can use to kind of heal from that and try to develop a different way to think and behave as an adult?
What was the first part of the question in terms? What part influences trauma?
Right. That was more so not part of the question, but just to set up how in speaking specifically of the Black community, a lot of times we don't have safety. Like, and the where I'm coming from that question is, my therapist one time asked me, um, he asked me, "Do you feel safe in your relationship?" And I'd never been asked that question. But not only have I never asked that question, never thought about it, and I had to come to the conclusion I've never felt safe in a relationship, nor did I seek safety in a relationship. Even though, the whole be my peace thing is always put out there, as far
Yeah.
as seeking safety from a woman in a relationship, or from a partner in general, I've never sought that because I didn't know what that looked like. Growing up, safety was, I mean, yeah, I don't know what safety is
Gotcha.
in the state of a relationship. So
Gotcha.
how does that, when we're experiencing trauma on a constant basis from racism, from poverty, from each other, like how does that affect your development, your attachment style, and how you and once you realize that that you're really thinking and behaving from a place of trauma response, how can you start to heal from that?
So attachment styles zoom in as far as you can probably be zoomed in to the human experience. It zooms in not only to the relationship between the child and the adult, but to their inner processes. So look at it like this. Take somebody in the Black community, four families in the Black community, four mothers and child, mother and child in the Black community, and put all four of them in one corner of a room. One of them is a mother that's there for their child and present for them. One of them is there sometimes, but not always. One of them is ain't there at all, and one of them is beating their child because they can beat them. This represents all four quadrants of the attachment styles. All of those people are still going to go out into that same world in which all of those active traumas, because they are members of the community, are going to happen. That zoomed in experience is just going to be the lens through which they can see that trauma. So the way I want you to look at it is zoom in to what safety must look like from each child in those four corners. In one corner, that child says, my person is going to be there for me when I need them to be there for me. The other one says they're going to be there sometimes, but they're not going to always be there. The other corner going to say they never going to be there for me. And the other one is going to say I always need to attack anybody because nobody is trustworthy. Right? And so I don't think that trauma impacts the child more than that lens that they have to look at that trauma through. Because a secure person, even in the midst of that trauma, they're still going to be capable of seeking people, individuals that provide them comfort and safety in that individual. You know, the avoidant person ain't never going to be able to find that, and they're going to be impacted differently by the trauma. The anxious avoidant person is going to have to manipulate for it, and the last one, disorganized, they're gonna have to fight their way into it. You know what I'm saying? So I think the way that we process what the trauma outside does is it has to be based on what they had from the inside to walk outside with.
Gotcha.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's the lens through which they interpret any other trauma. So the trauma you experience from the people closest to you, your parents, you know what I mean, as you grow up intimately, is going to determine how you interpret any other trauma outside of your home, and to the extent how you bounce back from it.
Exactly.
How you internalize it.
Now, there are a lot of traumas that can go on within that relationship that is building that attachment style. You know, so you can be outside of your parents' desire or will. You could have been molested or something could have happened to you while that parent was doing a good job at building a secure attachment. And you can still have a relative secure attachment, but with also some anxious and or avoidant tendencies, because somebody impacted your ability to trust. That was a one-off, one event in your life. A parent that spent 17 years with a child on their way to having a secure attachment, one person in 15 minutes can take that away from that person.
Wow.
It kind of lends to that 17 years though, kind of lends to their ability to bounce back from it and their ability to come to trust people later, versus somebody who is avoidant, who already has skepticism about people, and that 17 years that they were nurtured into being that avoidant, that happening to them, and they don't trust nobody else for the rest of their life. And so I think, and not only that, but like if we're talking about traumas like community traumas, like the black community stuff, the way white supremacy is going to treat you if you're a black family if you're black families in these rooms, those kids, they might not quite understand that stuff until they 6, 7, 8 for real. So they're still only clinging onto those four corners of relationships before they get out and really start seeing what's going on, and before those attachment styles or the parents that nurtured those attachment styles turned into how they process that world around them and those other traumas.
That's powerful. It's what it reminded me of. It honestly is kind of back to kind of what the crack epidemic did to our community, because and growing up in that era, it was like there weren't, if your parent was addicted to hard drugs, your security was shattered. You know what I mean? And there was so many of us that then also going into the latchkey kids, where it was like, yeah, maybe your one parent wasn't on drugs, but they had to work so much outside of the home, you were left unattended many times, or maybe you were, you know, like attending after your younger siblings, right? So now your because your sense of security, your sense of safety is it's not stable inside the home, and all the things you get outside of the home, it really puts you in a bad position, especially with regards to trust.
And let's nuance this thing on up. Let's say that your parent was able to raise you 13 years before they became addicted to drugs.
Right.
And let's say that you were on your way to being a secure kid for those 13 years, but now how does that impact the child that for 13 years was secure? For 13 years that was anxious, for 13 years that's avoidant, for 13 years that was disorganized. Or what about how if that happened early,
They got this
what
stuff.
were they like? Was it even possible for a secure attachment to come from a parent like that? I don't think so, but maybe, maybe they had a grandmama that kind of stepped in as much as mama, and so maybe they latched on to the idea of their grandparent being their parent, and they gained secure attachment from that. It's so many variables. It's so much nuance. Like just the idea that people get in here and have conversations and say, this is what you are because I saw this is preposterous. The way that we got how we are is, like I said, an endless sea of variables that brought us to this point. And we can't minimize the possibility of which of those variables gave us what it gave us. And we definitely can't one size fits all that shit. It definitely have to be on an individual one-on-one basis. And and from a therapist perspective, it hinges upon that individual's ability to recall what happened to them, how it happened to them. And we know that ain't instant recall because it's a whole bunch of confliction in how they understood and knew what was going on in their childhood. All of us that found out a bunch of shit about our families that was going on when we were kids that we didn't know, but we became who we became from what we believed the reality to be. And so you can't undo yourself because you found it out later. So it's so many variables that are in these assessments, which is why I started off by saying this is a theory and it's in a sea of a whole bunch of other things that create who we are. It's important to keep that at the forefront of all these conversations from my vantage point.
Nah, absolutely. And just quick commercial, man. This is why not only black men, black women, black children, and people in general need therapy. You know what I mean? Because you need to get to know yourself and to get in front of somebody that's a trained professional that knows these different theories and that can help you unpack all these things about yourself so that as an adult, you can begin to function and think independently of that trauma. You know what I mean? Even if that stuff has shaped your personality to a certain extent because of the way you perceive those things that happened in your past, now you have the tools to look at yourself in a different light and make different decisions. Like for me, I know I suffer from anxiety, but before I didn't have the word, or at least I knew what the word anxiety meant, but I never applied it to myself. I just knew I felt a type of way, you know what I mean? And I felt like the walls were closing in on me, and I felt like something bad was going to happen because of things that happened to me in my past. I was expecting the other shoe to drop, right? And because I was expecting that other shoe to drop, I began to behave differently because I'm tensing up. I'm bracing for impact. And part of that is based on reality, things that actually happened, but part of that is based on my perception of those things and my expectation for them to happen again. And so I would self-sabotage myself. You know what I mean? I felt like I had imposter syndrome, all of these different things that are going on in my mind that I didn't even realize or became conscious of until I started to unpack that. And yeah, so I really appreciate you breaking that down because we sometimes try to smash people into a box so that we can understand them better, so that we can label them and dismiss what they're saying because maybe it's challenging what our narrative of ourselves and our narrative of the world, or because we see ourselves in something that was done to them and we don't want to deal with that. That sometimes we hurt other people, or sometimes other people hurt us. So I really appreciate that. Going back to patriarchy a little bit, how do you think patriarchy impacts, or growing up in a patriarchal society impacts our relationship with our mothers, and how does our relationship with our mothers impact our relationship with women in the future? Would you say?
You know what? I think the biggest problem in patriarchy existing as far as our relationships with our mothers go ain't necessarily us as boys, but how the men that are around those boys and those women engage in dialogue and conversation. Because there's this sentiment that is like a great problem with me, that men seem to take pride in existing, which is a woman can't teach a boy to be a man. I hate that concept. Because as a man that was raised by a woman, when you look across the street at me, what do you see? Or what do you see is missing? And when you talk to me, what do you hear? Or what do you hear as missing? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Because you have to believe that I don't have something that I should have because a man wasn't in my life. And that doesn't assess the quality of man that would be in that child's life if the man that should be in that child's life was in that child's life. They don't take it. My daddy would have made me and my brother not great people if we were around him much more than we was. That's my assessment. You know, and it's a lot of men out there who got a lot of work on themselves to do before they can be present for kids in a significant way. You know, but the way patriarchy impacts boys is that men are perpetuating patriarchy around them. And this is what that does. So there's 4 dynamics that happen, and one of them is not like the others, right? One of them is if a father raises a daughter, there is no change. If a father raises a son, there is no change. If a mother raises a daughter, there is no change. But if a mother raises a son, as soon as he turned 18, patriarchy grants him the admin code for the system, because he just gained all the power that patriarchy gives him that his mother does not have. And because of that, if it happens to be a boy that grew up in a home with a mother that created a hostile environment or created resentment, he now has the power to perpetuate that onto the women that he meets. He essentially gets to utilize the anger and the frustration and the resentment that he has. He can get his get back through other women. And that's what we end up seeing when a boy has a problematic relationship with his parent, because that power that he gets, that entitlement that he gets, the idea that no woman is going to treat me the way that woman treat me, and society is going to back me on that. That is what that boy moves into. So to me, that's what becomes like the biggest threat of patriarchy with boys, is it gives them the freedom to believe that they can showcase that harm that their parent did to them. Well, it ain't that they showcasing it on purpose. It's a trauma response. It's more so unconsciously happening, but unconsciously happening at some points becomes consciously happening, and you continue doing it.
Right. So, and you may have answered this question already, but does patriarchy affect the way we relate to our fathers in a similar manner, or is that more static?
Absolutely. So shameless plug. I don't know if any of y'all listen to Kendrick Lamar, but he has a song called Father Time. And there's a lot of songs and a lot of bars spit about fathers not being present. But the song Father Time by Kendrick Lamar talks about how his father was there and was problematic being there. We don't talk about that a lot. We don't talk about the responsibility of fathers to be present for their sons appropriately. And so I did 40 videos breaking down each bar of that song. I did 40 videos. It's on a playlist on my page, breaking down every bar of that song about Kendrick Lamar talking about his relationship with his dad and the problems that came from it. And it was just me breaking it down and saying, hey, this is how this is a problem. This is what will happen if you allow this to continue, yada, yada, blah, blah, blah. That was the video. So patriarchy impacts boys because that box of patriarchy that we have when we are born, a father is pulling from that to teach their child how to be a man, because that's the only template we have to operate as men from. That box of patriarchy. It's like, oh shit, my son crying. What's in the box that informs me about how to deal with this? Oh shit, we not supposed to show emotion. Boy, big boys don't cry. Put them tears up. That's the only place you got to draw from. Right. And so that's where they draw from. And so until we abandon that box of patriarchy and try to figure out what else we need as men for boys, and how to help other men understand that there's a good outcome from it, then that's going to be one of the biggest draws of patriarchy as it pertains to fathers and sons.
That's powerful, man. I'm going to check out that playlist. Oh my gosh, because I'm a Kendrick Lamar fan, so I did not know that you went in on it like that. So I'm checking it out today. And what's the tragedy is, specifically with fathers and sons, is that you could, as a father or as a son, you could spend time with your father or you could spend time with your son, and in patriarchy would have at the end of that relationship, you still not really know each other. You know what I
Yep.
mean? Because you don't want to be vulnerable around your son. You know what I mean? You want to be Superman, or you want to, you know what I mean? You want to be bigger than life, because you're trying to show him this rugged road of manhood, when really learning him just being exposed to you will show him how to be a man, more than this really rigid construction of, oh, we just gonna go fix stuff. You know, I can only go, you know, do these officially sanctioned activities that fathers can have with their sons, and officially sanctioned conversations, as opposed to just experiencing the full range of life with a mature man who's lived it. You know what I mean? And so many memories aren't shared. So many stories get lost in translation because we want to filter so much of our experience to our sons and to younger men coming up, instead of telling them, no, this is the full range of what you're going to experience. And I feel like marriage is one of those things. Like we really filter marriage, and don't really share what it takes to be a husband, and some of the not only the trials and tribulations that you'll experience, but just the joy, you know, of sharing your life with someone, to the extent that when you finally get into the other side of that veil, it's a totally different experience and you're unprepared for it, because the married men that supposedly live life weren't honest with you, weren't honest at all. You know what I mean?
Did you have your father in your life?
That's a trick question. Yes,
Let me.
yes, and no. So I grew up with my. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
This is what I want to do. I'm gonna do it. When I In therapy, there's something called a magic question, and there's a
Yeah,
magic question that I ask men about their fathers because I'm trying to get some insight. The
sure.
question is, I'm about to set up a situation. You can ask your father any question, but the way that the question goes is he has to tell the truth, and he won't remember the question or that he gave you the answer after you ask it.
Right.
So it don't impact your relationship, and it don't create any awkwardness or distance because of what vulnerability does. I asked men, what question would you ask your father? And
Certainly.
it's so many different answers that come out, from the simple that is easy to ask to the complicated. And the only reason I feel like I'm comfortable because I asked my daddy my question. You know
Right.
what I'm saying? What I really wanted to know was how he met my mama, because they don't match. My daddy was a violent-ish drug dealer, and my mama was a church girl, and he answered the question, you
Right.
know, and it was a simple. And it's like formulating the question I wanted to ask taught me a lot about my relationship with my dad, because I realized I don't know shit about him. So going along with what you're saying, I ain't know nothing about him. Now he did spend my whole childhood in prison, and so going to prison wasn't the place where you say, "Hey, where you and mama meet?" Because when I went to visit him in prison, the visit was for him and my grandmama. It wasn't for us. We were just accompanying grandmama for real.
Right.
Um, and so, um, any man that's listening, engaging with what questions you would ask your father in this situation, if you could ask your father or the man that raised you or the men that you held as close as possible to you, it'll give you a lot of insight as to how close you actually were to that person. So that I just throwing it out there.
No,
But
absolutely. And I wasn't critiquing your question when I said it's a trick question. I was critiquing my relationship with my father, right?
yeah,
Because the reality was, I was speaking from experience. My father was in my life, but was not in my life,
yeah,
because what my conclusion, the only conclusion I could come to, was I didn't really know my father, right?
yeah,
Because I was raised by my mother, but I always knew who my father was. My grandmother was kind of the bridge between us, and we shared from the time I was like maybe 7 or 8. we shared regular time with each other. You know what I mean? But I guess when I got older and started making decisions on my own and determining kind of who I was outside of whatever idea he had for me or who I was supposed to be,
Yeah.
we drifted further and further apart. And when I got married, um, we eventually became estranged because I got married to a woman who already had children. You know what I mean? And I wanted to, but that I viewed as my own children or came to view as my own children, and treated other people like, if you did not acknowledge my children as, as a part of my family, then I couldn't really relate to you anymore, because that would put my marriage at risk. That would put my children at risk, because now I'm bringing someone around who does not validate them or view them with the proper respect. You know what I mean? And so my question to my father would be, why don't you fuck with me?
Yeah.
Why don't we have a relationship? What did I do wrong? And that's a question I did ask. That's a question I asked. I did not get an answer, and that's why we don't have a relationship
Gotcha.
at this point.
Gotcha.
And that's not that wasn't a quick thing, and those aren't easy things to say. That's something that took me. How old am I now? Took me about 20 years to come to that.
Oh yeah, I just asked my question last year. 39. I just asked him at 38 that question.
Yeah.
I lived with him last year for the first time because he just had got really assertive about asking to come live with him, and then he almost died. He almost went into a diabetic coma, and that like flipped some kind of switch in him to where he always say, "I love you" when we get off the phone to everybody, not just to me. Not even that. Like, he said like 5 or 6 times a day. Anytime I'm leaving the room talking to him, "I love you." Or if he called me and I'm at the store and "I love you," like every time, because from his vantage point, you don't know when the last time you're gonna get to tell the people that you love them. You
Facts.
know, and so, but when I was living with him, man, at 38 last year, as a therapist who don't work through a whole host of my shit that I've had going on, I the 13-year-old version of me who didn't have him that wanted him was showing up and showing out sometimes. Not like out loud, because my adult version has managed to learn how to, engage with the world appropriately, but it was showing up saying, "Don't let that man talk to you like that. He wasn't there for you to raise you. He wasn't there with you with your mama. He wasn't, going to your games. He wasn't teaching you how to throw." That 13-year-old kept showing up saying that stuff. Again, even though I've worked through all of the things for where I can have a conversation with that 13-year-old, be like, "Bro, chill."
Right.
You good, you got it. A lot of people's 13-year-old, one, you don't have the capability of managing that voice. When that 13-year-old come up, you essentially become that 13-year-old. So it's not a dialogue, it's a hostile takeover, essentially.
Right.
And a lot of work has to go into being able to have a conversation with that voice that's saying those things.
No, facts. I think I know I did, and I think a lot of men in our community suffer from arrested development in one form or another. Because when you experience something like really traumatic, at least from my experience, like part of you stays there. You know what I mean? Part of you gets stuck there. For me, it was like when I was 11 or 12. You know what I mean? And the it's almost like living in two worlds, because me and my mother were living in a more urban setting, and my father did well for himself. You know what I mean? So when I go to visit my father, I'm like in the Cosby Show for a weekend. It's like just money and it's food and it's all, all these other things going. And then when I go back to reality, you know what I mean? It's a totally different set of circumstances. It's police helicopters, and you know what I mean? It's all people breaking into your house and all types of crazy stuff going on. And but putting all that aside, I love my father. You know what I mean? Like, I damn near worshipped him, wanted to be like him. And I think what the tragedy of it is that my father was there for me in some very critical times in my life where, like, if it wasn't for my father, you might not be talking to me right now, because there was like, I was getting ready to go off the rails here or there, and he was there to just kind of push me back onto that path. But at the same time, once I got right and decided where I wanted to go, it was like, oh, well, and that, for me, what that says is, and goes back to patriarchy, we identify more with the role of what we're supposed to be as a man or as a father than the relationship. You know what I mean? It's because we've been taught to view our children as burdens and view our children as maybe even responsibilities, but not as people. You know what I mean? And once they outgrow the role and the responsibility, you really don't know how to relate to them because you really, as a man, have become more mechanical than you like to give yourself credit for. And one of the biggest critiques my wife ever gave me was, you feel like a robot. You know what I mean? Because I had bought into the very same patriarchal thinking that my father had, and I was kind of replicating the very same behaviors and not realizing it because that's who I associated with. But once I started to critique that and understand kind of where it is, that's when we can't have a conversation about it. So I just encourage like men, whether you're a father or a son in that role, to have genuine interactions with the men around you. You know what I mean? You don't have to. I know as teenagers we posture. You know what I mean? And that's a part of growing up. We're gonna posture. We're gonna puff our chest out. We're gonna see how many push-ups each other can do or whatever. But at a certain point, push-ups aren't gonna get you out of adult problems. You know what I mean? And I think a lot of times we as men shortchange ourselves because we've made all of our relationships activity based. We go play basketball, we play video games. We go drinking together. But when we're really going through a crisis, and this is just me speaking from my perspective, we're not used to relating to each other emotionally. I have several married friends. I've never talked to my friends about my marital problems because I've been conditioned that that's not something you do as a man. I don't show vulnerability to other men for various reasons. You know what I mean? But that's the type of friendships you need once you actually grow into adult issues and adult responsibilities. So I really appreciate that question. Again, every time I talk, I learn a little bit more about myself and about the world around me. Want to ask you one more question, and then we can open it up. If you're comfortable with it, we can either answer questions from the comments, or if someone has, 1,000 followers and can come on camera, or not come on camera, and just wants to kind of answer their question, ask their questions vocally, they can do that as well. But given this conversation, how do we learn and adopt kind of taking into account how we learn and adopt patriarchal ideals in early childhood? What are some of the ways we can reprogram ourselves now that we're adults? What are some techniques or tools or ways to think about kind of deprogramming from some of the more toxic ideas that are in patriarchy?
I think that if you, at the core, I think if we work on humanizing women and moving as far from objectification as possible, I think that's one big part of the journey. Like, how do you come to see a woman having the exact same, like being a part of the same humanity that you are a part of? How do you do that? Like, we have to become comfortable with women existing how they want to exist, which is the antithesis to patriarchy and many parts of Christianity, because all of those things dictate how women should exist. And so a lot of it is going to challenge those systems. But for ourselves as men, one, we need to learn emotional intelligence. I've seen creators saying that emotional intelligence, saying things like, holding your emotions down and not expressing them is emotional intelligence. And that's not true. Yeah. Emotional intelligence is knowing what emotions look like, knowing what may create certain emotions, understanding that a lot of emotions overlap at any given time, to have 3 or 4 going on at the same time, and knowing how to detect these things in other people, and learning what to do. And I know this because therapy is a skill. Like, therapy ain't a personality or a character trait. It's a skill. It's something you learn. Like, if somebody has a parent that's a drug fiend that dies from an overdose, there are particular emotions that come from that. You can, there can be grief, there can be anger, There could be resentment. There can be abandonment. All of those emotions can exist at one time, and they all do their own little things. We got to get more comfortable with being emotionally intelligent. Another thing is we have to figure out how to be vulnerable. And a lot of people talk about men being vulnerable. What I've been working on is language related to the entry point to vulnerability. So we know that men have this really big ass wall in front of them of don't be vulnerable. How do we get through that wall? We got to find an entry point. And so the conversation for me now is the entry point. And I haven't been doing a lot of TikTok this year because I just got real deep into getting my caseload full of a lot of black men, but just it's a full caseload now. Black men and black boys mostly.
Salute.
Thank you. And I just haven't had time, but the theme of my conversations with men in general, but black men specifically, is we have to learn how to use our voice. Like that has to come before anything. We cannot adopt what you adopted, which is that stoic, silent presence that is just supposed to, make sure that things are taken care of in the background, like background processes. We have to use our voice. We have to tell our partners what we feel, where we struggle. We have to tell them what we want. When men come to my counseling session, a lot of men get socks and stuff they don't want for holidays and stuff. One of my clients said, I told my wife I wanted a toolbox, and she bought me a Gucci belt. And what the hell I'm gonna do with a Gucci belt? That was his thing. And I said, I tell them, as long as you stick with me, this is gonna be the last Father's Day you get some damn socks. The reason that you're getting socks is because you're not using your voice. But they didn't wake up and say, I want to buy my daddy socks. They woke up and said, my daddy don't need very much. And so a little something should be more than enough for him. They're just following your strategy about you. They didn't come up with it on their own. You helped them structure that over time, and now you're coming to resent it. So learning emotional intelligence, acknowledging a woman's humanity and treating her as such, and treating them as such, learning emotional intelligence, learning how to use your voice, and figuring out the entry point to vulnerability in your life. Those are the top tier. If men really get on a deep journey to do these things, they will come out on the better end of all of this stuff. Oh, I guess the overcast of that is believe patriarchy is real. If you struggle with it, because before I knew it was real, I asked myself, what if it's real? If it's real, does it look like the things that I'm doing? And are the things that I'm doing potentially causing the people around me harm? And a man that grew up with top tier women in his life was still doing shit that created problems because of that package of patriarchy that was given to me, that I didn't have to be taught. Society around me just gave me the template for it. So believe it's real. And if you don't believe it's real, do an experiment and assessment on yourself as to if your behaviors match the things that you hear about it. If it is, you need to investigate with the women around you. Have these things been problems?
No, absolutely. Because if it's not real for you, and privilege is often something that's overlooked. You know what I mean? Because it's not something that happens to you, something that doesn't happen to you. But if it's real to the women around you, you need to ask them about it first, and then maybe you'll start to see it. Just shameless plug. First book we're going into with the Will to Change Project is Emotional Intelligence 2.0. So we'll be going through that as just in content over the next week. So I appreciate that was one of the things that you listed, because it lets me know that we're on the right track as far as, okay, we need to have that foundation of emotional intelligence before we can address some of these other, more specific topics. But I wanted to ask a follow-up question, because one of the things I run into when women say, hey, you don't see me as a human being, I'm not sure that a lot of men know what that means, because they don't treat themselves as human beings. Like, I don't know if we spend a lot of time thinking about what it means to be human, or what it means to celebrate our humanity. So for those men that may not be aware of what that actually means, when you treat someone or see them as human, can you go into that a little bit more?
Yeah. When I say that, well, it's a lot of things that women say that men don't understand. In the context of this conversation, because we have the luxury of minimizing a lot of those things. And the reason I know is because white people do the same thing to black people. Like I said, when you talk about oppression, oppression is a template. And so it looks the same in different ways, but it looks the same. And so white people have the luxury of not understanding the intricacies of black existence. And so men have the privilege of not looking at the intricacies of woman existence. And so it's a lot of stuff that women say that we don't know is a problem. You
Mm.
know, so a big part of it is like we definitely need to be listening to women and understanding. But when it comes to understanding women as their humanity, it's kind of like the term is objectification. Like we look at women as objects. We look at like everything if you work in an office, everything on your desk serves a function, serves a purpose. It does something for you. Those are objects that you utilize for certain things. And men look at women without doing work. A lot of us look at women as those objects, as those things. She provides a function. The function may be sex, the function may be cleaning, the function may be cooking, you know, but you don't look at that person and ask, uh, is she emotionally available to cook today? You know, is she suffering from something that humans suffer from? Like a lot of the times, like you don't ask if your stapler is fucking feeling good today. You know what I'm saying? You don't ask if your keyboard is up to the task of typing. You just use the shit and you don't worry about those things. And when I say we need to start seeing women through the lens of their humanity, is at the foundation, all of us, men and women, we exist of tears. You know, we exist of pain, we exist of suffering and struggles. You know, in the context of suffering, an itch is suffering. You know, an itch that we scratch and get relief from has enough force to probably kill an ant. You know what I'm
It's
saying?
relative.
So it's suffering exists in small ways and in really, really big ways. And if we're not accepting that within the context of humanity, women have these sufferings and or we're willing to overlook them because we want them to provide their function, that matters. And I tell people, I play Xbox. I'm a gamer. And if I came home and my Xbox had left my house to go to the neighbor's house to play and I didn't get to play it that day and it came back, you can guarantee that I'm going to be nailing that thing down the next time I get home so that it can't leave. And a
Mhm.
lot of men carry that vantage point as it pertains to women because you see them as that object. You see them as that thing to use. You know, a woman's humanity gives her the autonomy and the freedom to be who she is, how she wants to be, and as much freedom as you have to be everything that you're going to be. Albeit differently than you, if you subscribe to women and men having mass differences, you know, but they should have the freedom to have it as much as they desire. So that's what I mean when I say seeing women through the lens of their humanity. Just
Mm.
not seeing them not being a function primarily, them being a human primarily, and then you inquiring with them about the state and the space that they're in to provide those functions if they choose to.
Absolutely. Great answer. Great answer. Okay. So we're gonna get into our Q&A. If your time permits, if we could go maybe for about a half an hour,
Yeah, yeah.
see what questions we have. So 21, do anything for Cloud Chaser. I love the name. What would it have meant for you two as young men to have been given permission not to stay in the man box?
Have you heard of the man box?
Um, I was using it. I was going to answer in context of the conversation as you used it, but yeah, can you go into it a little bit?
I forgot the name of the guy, but just coincidentally, he's been here. I collaborate with a organization called Brother Let's Talk, and they do trainings, and they've been doing a man box training over the last month. But it's a website called A Call to Men that talks about the man box. It's essentially a whole training metric about all of these things. That box I talk about now, I've been talking about that box that I was talking about before the man box came out. That box of patriarchy that we given when we born. I ain't gonna take no credit for it or make nothing about it, but you know, because the man box exists, it sounds like my box come from that. Either way, it's just about all the things that exist in that box that tells us that this is how a man has to exist. Okay. So for anybody who is listening, it is a formal expression that you can go look up, the man box. You know, but to be honest, I don't feel like I had to exist in the man box per my family. But I think that, so I didn't have anybody aggressively saying this is how a man's supposed to be. But I think it's just as harmful not having anybody, like everybody pretending like it ain't a thing, or not having a language to talk about it. I think that's just as harmful, because where I learned about masculinity was from random places that ain't got nothing to do with whatever my family's ideals about what I should be as a man exist. You know? But I want to answer that question differently, I guess. I feel like if I didn't live in a society where that existed and I didn't have to participate in it, I think that I would have I don't know. We live in such a different society. Yeah. I think that for me personally, I think that I would have been able to use my voice more earlier. I would have been able to tell people what I needed and what I desired from them more intentionally. I believe that I don't believe that all of my relationships would have survived, but I also don't believe that I would have chose the relationships that I chose. I believe that I wouldn't have had I wouldn't have had to catch up with learning how to be a man in the context of how I'm supposed to present myself to the world and how I'm supposed to think about myself. If I was completely isolated from that and nobody around me gave me the language to those things, I think those are the places that would have helped me more than anything.
Good point. I know for me, it's funny, and you said this earlier. I was aware of the man box way before I was in it, right? And so for many years, like in elementary, going into junior high, I was not, unconsciously I knew this, but I was being picked on and bullied because I wasn't in that box. You know what I mean? Because I was seen as abnormal because I was just being myself, right? I too did not have like a box that was given to me because I grew up in a household of, I had men in my family, but primarily the core was women who didn't put me in any box. They let me be me. But around 7th or 8th grade, I decided to create a man box for myself because I was tired of being bullied in that way. So that meant bulking up, meant getting physically stronger. I took it to the extreme. Like anything manly, like I started chewing on a toothpick. I started keeping a pen behind my ear. I started sagging because that was kind of popular back in the day, wearing my clothes baggy, doing that differently, shopping for myself as far as picking out my clothes that I wore. Got more violent, so I got into some more altercations. But there were altercations that I won because sometimes there were altercations that I was aware of them developing. It wasn't like it took me by surprise because I wasn't, I was aware of those things at that point. Like, oh, this is an opportunity for me to prove myself. Let me prove myself. Got into sports, basketball, football. Then that led to more, because here's the thing. Because of the examples that I had as far as manhood is concerned, 85% self-destructive. So a man can hold his liquor. A man can maintain his high and still get home. A man knows how to finesse and has a gift of gab, can be, manipulative, knows how to get a woman's phone number, knows how to, get something from a woman if he wants. These are the things that I internalized as what it meant to be a man through observation. It wasn't like somebody, grabbed me by my shoulder and tried to tell me, here are the 25 laws to be a man. But this is through observation, what I saw men doing. And that was the man box that I understood it was. So then we started dealing with people that was stealing cars. You know what I mean? And was
Yeah.
doing more felonious, hanging out on a whatever corner we was on or whatever. Shoplifting because we wanted to get video games, we wanted gear or whatever. So all of those things were done to kind of put on the veneer of manhood, to put on that mask, to not be outside of that box anymore. Um, even to the way I lost my virginity, it was for that reason. It was what a girl I didn't even really necessarily like. She was available, and I was tired of being ridiculed for being a virgin. So I was like, okay. So and that was unprotected sex. You know what I mean? It was just so I opened myself up to a lot of potentially could have went to jail, potentially could have got a disease, potentially could have got unalived, all in the quest of this idea of manhood, this man box. Because I was a nerd. I like science. I wanted to be an engineer. But being seen as a man was more important to me than any of that at that point. So I almost damn near dropped out of high school because I was skipping class. You know, what I mean, I was doing whatever, just doing dumb stuff. You know what I'm saying? And a lot of, let me not say a lot of, but at least from my observation, a lot of my peer group were doing similar things. They either didn't have the direction, they didn't know where their life was going, and they didn't see a future in their life. So it was, let me enjoy these moments that I can get, whatever I can get. If it's women, girls, whatever I can get right now, because I don't see a future, and actually the future kind of scares me. You know what I mean? Some partners get locked up. It was just like almost a foregone conclusion. Not that I was in this ultra violent, neighborhood or anything of that nature. It was just that the expectation wasn't a long life. You know what I mean? Just in my head. Was not thinking beyond 25, right? So not being in that man box or not putting myself in that man box would have just allowed me to plan better. Would allow me to still use my creativity and my giving gifts, put those on display and actually utilize them for something better than that. You know what I mean? So that, yeah, I would say that. You know what I mean? Sometimes, and that's not to try and say that everybody's man box is the same, because other men might have put themselves in a man box and it might have done well for them. But for me, based on what I was looking at, the man box had a lot of negative things in it, but it was based on survival techniques. It was based on being respected. You know what I mean? So I'll end it there.
But just to add to that, like those things were lying dormant in your subconscious, so that when that survival mechanism popped up, the immediate idea was violence. The immediate idea was bulking up. The immediate idea was being more assertive, more aggressive.
Mm.
And like without being taught that, that's what's left behind with just watching TV, with just reading books and stories. You know, it always comes back down to our society has really put a template down of how men supposed to exist. And even if we're in an environment like, again, with the women in my life, it's like it wasn't a solid environment of this is how men exist. But like it seems to always come to, when we trying to figure it out, we always got these same metrics to employ that are supposed to be what masculinity is. So we got it. It's lying dormant because it comes from somewhere.
Right.
Even the patriarchy in the church show up like that. Even if it's like you raised by mama, but when you go to the church, you see how the women treat the men, you see how the men treat the women. Kids are absorbing those things, and they absorb those roles from that, and they lie dormant in that subconscious until it's ready to show up. It's more dangerous for girls for that, because them adopting the idea of men being violent is the reason that they end up being around violent men. And being more aware of all of these things, to where we don't say, oh, he hit you, he just like you, girl. No, he hit you, stay away from that boy.
Right.
That's what it needs to be.
Excellent. Looking for other questions in the comments. Again, if you want to come up for a few minutes and ask your question, you can do so as well. Um, Our King Solver said, "You're objectified as well, seeking a complementary object. Discovering your own wholeness releases women." So I think she was going back to when we were talking about the humanity conversation, and she's basically saying that men are objectified as well. Like we objectify ourselves in a way, you know what I mean? Or I think in a way, the because life because we were using more and more machines, you know what I mean, to accomplish life, we actually want to become more like machines, more like just input output, you know what I mean, and not necessarily dealing with, I hear a lot facts over feelings and things of that nature, but your feelings are also facts. It's a fact that you're feeling the way that you're feeling. And if you're not acknowledging those feelings and really trying to find out where they come from, you're doing yourself a disservice because that too is a fact. I hate when people, and that's a way that we dehumanize ourselves when we try to paint ourselves as just purely logical creatures that don't necessarily experience emotions or aren't driven by emotions. It's just sometimes we're driven by the wrong emotions and we allow our emotions to drive us. You can't tell me that the person who, if they get their shoes stepped on when you walk by and they start a fight over somebody stepping over their shoes, that they're not reacting out of emotion. You know what I mean? So, men experience emotions well. Women have logic too. It's, we gotta break that down.
Yeah, everybody definitely experiences everything in some capacity. I just, when we talking about objectification, men being objectified doesn't hurt men the way that women being objectified hurts women.
Right.
Right. And so I think it is important to acknowledge that we are objectified in many ways. But for a man on his own individual journey, considering your harm is not more important. Considering the harm that comes to you is not more important than getting a handle on how many ways you harm people. And once you have come to a point where you have minimized your capacity to output harm from your own vantage point, then it's time to start investigating how people harm you.
Mm. That's a powerful point. I gotta ponder that. The Wireless Woman, how are you? Thank you so much for joining us. What question do you have? Thank you for joining the conversation.
Absolutely. It's my first time over here, and I love the work that you do. I appreciate it. I wanted to ask a question because I know this comes up a lot, but patriarchy in particular has been a facet that's been used to, and Eddie too. I've never spoken to you, but I wanted to let you know I really appreciated a lot of what you brought to this conversation. But I just got a general question. It's been used as an instrument to oppress the whole entire Black community. That has been why we hadn't seen gender play such a large part in previous years with the Black community. So my question is, at this juncture where we are, what do you feel like is the contribution that women can make? Because for us, we just been consistently told kind of to get out of the way, be quiet, docile, feminine, fit, friendly. These are the ways that we support Black men. But when it comes to the ones that really want to dismantle patriarchy as a mechanism against them, right? How do we then come in now? Or what do you feel like that's going to look like for us to be supportive in that fight? And let me just kind of qualify my question a little bit. In previous years, because the fight was for Black liberation, we knew how to support you. We had the Black Panthers, we had, so at this juncture, what do you feel like that type of gendered support looks like?
I think it was easier to answer that question for white supremacy because it wasn't Black people were the subject of the oppression. And so I think it's a much more complex question when it's how do I, as the subject of the oppression, help myself get out of the oppression? Because my vantage point has always been that it ain't Black folks' work to do to get out of the oppression of white supremacy. That's white folks' work to do. And so if I'm going to be consistent in my ideals, then I have to also say that it's not women's responsibility to help men unravel patriarchy. It's men's responsibility to help men unravel patriarchy. The more nuanced part of that is we desire to love each other. So it is not in your best interest to remove yourself from that journey, which makes it a different question in terms of how do I navigate being the oppressed by the oppressor while I desire to value and love the oppressor. And I don't have a great answer for this, but my answer lies in this idea for me that this is very hard to say. I don't think patriarchy can be dismantled as a whole without most men dying and this system being rebuilt or rebirthed in some kind of way. So if patriarchy can't be dismantled, then what can happen? What I think is that we can help the people that we can help dismantle it. So I think that when we look at dismantling patriarchy as a whole, and we get on TikTok and we say our video, and we get out in the middle of the street with a microphone and say patriarchy, patriarchy, there's a host of men and women that are going to adhere to patriarchy because it works for them. Women too. Like, not every woman cares to hop out of that system. Not every woman cares to hop into feminism. And so I think the journey becomes identifying which men are suitable for that journey in that conversation, identifying what women are suitable for that journey in that conversation, and then having that conversation amongst those groups to create systems of dismantling it for them. And the best that we can hope is that that begins to transfer in mass to individuals' children. And those children, it changes over generations. And so I think the journey of dismantling patriarchy while I'm alive is a really, really big bite out of something that we can't eat all of. You know, and so I think that we have to make that bite manageable. So I think the conversation with ourselves has to be, what's a manageable bite? I don't think I answered the question. So what can you do as women to take that bite? It's understand the nuances of patriarchy, but not only the nuances of patriarchy, but the peculiar, and this is a conversation that I normally have with black men in the room that I try not to have with women in the room because it's a different kind of conversation. The peculiar place that black men are in as it pertains to this system. When it comes to patriarchy, black men, we don't get country club patriarchy. We get eat out the back door patriarchy. We get the patriarchy that's left over when the race correction is added into it, right? So think of it like there's a big building that a party is going on in, and all men can get in the party, and women all see the men all going into the party, all races of men going into the party. But what they don't realize is that when the black men get in there, they got on the white suits and they serving hors d'oeuvres. You know what I'm saying? And so it's like there is value in being in the room with those men from the woman perspective, but when the men get in there, then when the black men get in there, the access that we have to it being a valuable space becomes very limited. That's from the zoomed out perspective. But when you zoom into the black community, the things that we learned in that room by ear is enough to hold black women down enough for black women to need to fight against that system. So that is a very, very peculiar place, because looking at patriarchy like all men have the access to the same patriarchy minimizes how black men feel in a world of white men where we are expendable. Like, we're expendable of that hierarchy. Like, okay, this is a theory. And it's not my theory. It's kind of it's called social dominance theory. And I've asked the women this question to figure out what the answer is, and I don't know the answer. It's a hypothetical question. As it pertains to white men and how white men view everybody up under them, white women, black men, black women, who is more expendable to white men? Black men or black women? I don't quite know the answer to that question. It's no answer to that question. From my vantage point, I think we as black men, I think if white men could snap and erase one of those four groups between themselves, white women, black men, and black women, I think they would erase black men. But some women that I've had a conversation with believe that white men would erase black women. And I'm like, I don't know the answer to the question. It's because on one hand, I don't know what white men see as our value to them, because every juncture that it comes to where a white man can harm a black person, a black man becomes harmed. And that happens with black women too, but there are pockets where black or white men use black women to do a lot of their bidding as it pertains to black men. Again, all of that is just to say we sit in a peculiar place in that journey that is different to navigate. But what I would say to do is provide space for men to step outside of the man box. Allow them space to be vulnerable. Encourage that vulnerability. Give them the freedom to be weak. Communicate with them. Help them learn how to communicate. All of these different things to help them step out of the man box. Because again, investigate how much of that little box of patriarchy that you have. Like when your grandparents or your parents taught you as women how to tend to men and all of the things that you're supposed to do that's supposed to be to the end of men. A lot of that stuff got to be erased and dismantled, you know. But I know that I'm just filibustering now. But that answer was vague. But that's what I got. I don't know, said a lot.
No, just to, I guess, share in addition to that, I would say that a black woman's priority is first to her safety, to her sanity, and the satisfaction that she gets from her own life, right? That has to be your priority. So you have to begin to center yourself and not necessarily center men, because it's interesting, because if you ask a lot of black men, not going to say all black men, they would say that the black community is a matriarchy, right? And yet there is very little support for black women leadership in the black community. So it's a paradox in that way, a paradox of perception. And in reality, a lot of times it's because, the prison industrial complex is in place. A lot of black men are being unalived. The prison, school to prison pipeline, all these different factors that play into the reason why black patriarchy is broken, and it can be confused with black matriarchy, right? So I think as women liberate themselves through education, through economic empowerment, and through really actually breaking down patriarchy for themselves, they will leave the breadcrumbs for the men who are willing and want and are saying, wait a minute, where did all the women go? Why am I not connecting with women anymore? The men that actually ask that sincere question will begin to pick up on those breadcrumbs and start to deconstruct and dismantle patriarchy for themselves. I think that the tragedy is that men's liberation got their nod from women's liberation. That's where they got their inspiration in the 70s. Men started to question, what does it mean to be a man, when women began to ask, what does it mean to be a woman outside of patriarchal domination? But because we still want the benefits of patriarchy, even though we're asking the same questions that you all are, what are these gender roles? Why do I have to conform to them? We're still at odds with each other, because we want to still benefit from patriarchy, but not play the role of a patriarch. In some cases. So, and that is to Eddie's point, it's a generational problem. And so, you all being kind of the forebearers of that, the forerunners, you're now planting seeds for the next generation of women and young boys to come up in a different, hopefully a different paradigm. Because until there's a mass socialization of different ways of being, you're still going to have the ultimate problem is war and imperialism, right? The reason why more peaceful societies don't thrive is because the presence of more warlike societies that just exist and thrive off of conquering other peoples, right? There wasn't like a superior intellect that came over to America and conquered, the America. It was a more warlike, more barbaric society that came over and just said, "Hey, oh yeah, we believe in private property, we believe in slavery, we believe in mass genocide. You all don't, even though you all know how to live with the land more." We're going to take what we can from that, and then we're just going to, use that against you once we've taken advantage of that kindness. And that has perpetuated itself through history, especially in colonization. So that's the principal problem that, I think any matriarchal or more peaceful society has to solve, is how do you deal with the other societies that still exist, the imperialistic powers that only want to conquer, colonize, rape the environment, so on and so forth, right? So I think that's to Eddie's point when we say, can patriarchy be dismantled, is because it's inherently self-destructive, and you can't save someone who wants to destroy themselves, right? Because it's like a drowning man, right? You got to knock that person out before you can rescue them from the waters, because otherwise, and you trying to save them, you're going to drown as well. And when we're dealing with a person that's indoctrinated in patriarchy, they are that drowning man. And my fear is that as women try to save that man, they wind up drowning as well. So your first priority is to your safety, your sanity, and the satisfaction you get out of your personal life, and to network with other women to pull them out of kind of that haze, and to hopefully build for future generations. In the meantime, for men that are waking up, so to speak, and are starting to question that, you're giving them those resources, I think is key. You know what I mean? Because the books that I read that helped to wake me up weren't necessarily books written by men. They were books written by women who were liberating themselves. And then I started to say, oh, wait a minute. If they can experience this freedom, how can I experience it too? Right. I think that was actually the quickest Q&A we had, but it was a great question. I want to thank Eddie for taking the time. We're going to do a second session of this shortly. I'm going to take a quick break and then come on with PYT Cassia. But Eddie, I want to be definitely cognizant of your time. We said 1 to 2 hours, and you've been a great guest, man. So much knowledge dropped during this session, man. I appreciate you. Everyone, make sure that you follow Eddiebetalkin, and make sure that you check out his 40 playlist of for Kendrick Lamar. I think that's a great project. And we need to focus on hip hop, because that's what a lot of young men are listening to. And when there's a voice that's speaking up about those type of topics, we need to give attention to it, man. So I appreciate you, brother. Do you have any final comments you want to share?
I think that it's I'm gonna type the article in the. But I mentioned this article earlier. It's called "He Loves Her Not: Attachment Style as a Personality Antecedent to Men's Ambivalent Sexism," and it paints a pretty stark connection to those attachment styles and which type of sexism they participate in, and it also gives some insight on the type of experience that secure men have with women. I think it's worth a read. But the journey of understanding ourselves and growing from this is a never ending process. You're never going to be there. As a man, there is no there to be. And one thing that we have to remember is that as members of oppressed groups, or as a person that is trying to understand and fight for oppressed groups, we will always be a nameless, voiceless shadow figure behind the people who are progressing. And we don't need kudos for it, because we're doing it because it's right. It's not supposed to be performative, but you got to accept that you're not going to get no credit for the work that's being done. That's one difficult part in having these conversations about patriarchy. We have to understand that, like, for me, it's just right. It just makes sense. Like, women ain't got no business being treated the way that they fucking treated out here. You know what I'm saying? And we can focus on what happens to us when we get a control on what happened to women. When the data suggesting how much violence go to a woman, then we can talk about what happened to us. But like, let's reduce the harm towards women first before we start saying, but this be happening to us. And understand that it's going to be a lifelong journey, man. You're never going to be there. Just keep at it.
Whoever wins is the one that writes the history. How did they do it will forever be a mystery. Winning is the mindset you keep when you won't accept defeat. And I repeat, I'm the creator of my sheet. I got some images in my head I don't bother to touch. Anxious cause you don't know who is who and what is what. Setting fires to bridges, yeah, I'm keeping all doors shut. Find solace in being separate cause it's therapeutic. So when you're claiming that you victim, make sure you're the plaintiff. You gon' hear me when I tell you I ain't nothing to play with. I sing it to you in a soft tone, but I got grit. Heard some niggas been talking and listen to what they said, and I'm just mad that she ain't give it to me. And that girl Yon was great when I liked her, but now she ain't with a thing. He said they ain't a fan of marriage, but he passing out rings. Fraudulent, making money, selling off bad dreams. I'm locked up in my head thinking I'm toxic. If you talking down bad, then you may as well just gon' switch up your topic. I ain't got no love for you, gon' stop it. You a thespian and putting up in that, gon' drop it.